question number 6. Briefly describe your solution to the fiscal entanglement Colorado faces with respect to the interplay between Gallagher and Amendment 23 Tabor and the statutory limitations of Arbor-Bird. And in the meantime, describe what your priorities would be in cutting the state budget.
That's a big question, and a very important one too. We certainly do know that Colorado in the last 2 years has been in a fiscal crisis, and that in a discussion with Legislative Council today, that will be continuing into the year 2010 and 2011. Next year, we're going to be facing an $800 million deficit in the state of Colorado, and at that time, we have to make some very, very tough choices. As you know, we had a ballot initiative in 2008 that was going to allow some revisions to Tabor to the voters would have still had the ability to vote on increasing taxes, but we would have been able, the legislature would be able to keep the excess revenue. There has been, I think, a significant milestone with the Arbor-Bird bill that did manage to pass the legislature. And I realize that those are 2 legislators' names that were back in the 90s that you probably are not familiar with. The Arbor-Bird amendment to the Tabor amendment limited the percentage of spending to 6%. Therefore, there was a ratchet down effect. No matter how much revenue came in, we were limited by the 6% as to how much we could spend. So if we found fiscal years where there was less revenue, then we have a ratchet down effect, which means that the next year we start out at a lower percentage of revenue. So it was a very contentious issue in the legislature this year to remove the Arbor-Bird amendment from the Tabor amendment, but it has passed the legislature successfully, and I do expect to see the governor pass that. Sign that. I think that it probably would be subject to some court challenge, as we know that the Republican side of the legislature is very disappointed that managed to get passed. We in Colorado, and what will we do in 2010 and 2011, when again faced with an $800 million deficit, again you have to make some tough choices. The education part of it is 42% of our budget. Our budget this past year was about $7.2 billion. Education is a big chunk of that. And as you know, higher education also takes a significant chunk. Prisons take a significant chunk. And so we have to very carefully look at where we set our priorities. We do know for sure that we want to make sure that we continue with our education as a priority. We have to fund higher education. You know, they face tough choices with that this year. And we also, by Constitution, have to have a balanced budget in the state of Colorado. It's a collaborative process. Everybody has to get together and have that conversation about priorities. And it does take leadership. I know the budget would be very helpful in that process.
By a show of hands, how many people here think they fully understand Tabor? Yeah, I think that's a serious card. It's a cryptic, difficult issue. I'm going to try to give you guys the Reader's Digest version as I understand it and tell you what I would do. Okay, so the Tabor effectively states that budget increases are limited to no more than 6% of the previous year's general fund. So picture it as a savings account, right? So whatever you saved in the previous year, you can't increase your spending by any more than 6% what was saved. But if you're in a recession, like now, your savings is diminishing, right? It's coming down. And so you have less and less that you can allocate for future budget increases, okay? Now, there was another piece of legislation called Arbor-Bird. Arbor-Bird said, well, let's say that we had a pretty good budget year and our savings account is growing. So we will say that anything beyond that 6% will be allocated to repairing our roads and bridges, right? So if we had 8%, then we can take that extra 2 or whatnot and put it towards roads and bridges to build potholes only. So we cannot take that additional money and put it in education or in healthcare or any other places where I think this community's values are reflected. Now, enter Senate Bill 228, which just passed actually this session. Senate Bill 228 repealed our scout burden. So basically said, nope, we can take this excess over 6%, invest it anywhere we want, right, in schools or in medical facilities, etc. And it also helped us to combat this what they call this ratchet down effect, which basically means you have less and less money to allocate for other projects, okay? And so I think that the solution for this budget crisis is a number of things. One, we need to continue to look at legislation that helps us to repeal and reform TABOR, because we have the most restrictive budgeting practices probably in 50 states. Continue to find innovative ways, I think, to create revenue and cut spending, okay? So to create revenue, Governor Ritter, I thought, had an excellent idea to try to increase fees or tax revenues on the oil and gas industry. It's one of the lowest tax structures in all 50 states. The lobby was serious against his efforts, right? I think we should bring that back and work on it. And I think we need to critically examine other areas.
Unfortunately, on this topic, the good news is that it's currently bad, because the bad news is it's about to get worse. So there are this perfect storm of the 4 items that we're talking about. There's the Gallagher Amendment, there's TABOR, there's Amendment 23, and there's Arvin Scout Bird. The benefit of the removal of Arvin Scout Bird is now, thanks to Sean Hinger's help and others at the state capitol, it's replaced with this 5% adjustment of personal income. So there's a little more freedom there. But the challenge is TABOR is about to get worse, because through a lot of leadership from folks in this room, we passed Referendum C 5 years ago, which put a 5-year hiatus on TABOR. But because of the failure, despite Representative Romanoff's tremendous work on Amendment 59, that's about to sunset, which means we're going to have all of this come crashing back, and even in a more dramatic fashion in the next year or two than we've seen already. So the challenge, the question is, what do we do about TABOR? And as some people know, the problem is, because TABOR was passed before the single item ballot rule, there are 4 or 5 different items in TABOR that would take 4 or 5 different amendments to undo. So there are 2 options. One is we try and organize a tremendous amount of political support behind a whole slate of amendments that would go as a TABOR package to try and undo it all at once. And I think that's one option we should look seriously at, because we're right that the budget is strangled right now without doing something dramatic. The other option that Senator Al White has proposed is, do we try and do this through a constitutional convention? Do we actually see if we can get a number of all the legislators in the room and see if we can address, especially in this financial times, the fact that if we don't do something dramatic right now, we're going to be in such significant struggles. We'll have people, elderly folks going without critical health care. We'll have colleges that are going to be closing. We'll have community colleges that no longer provide fundamental services. So I think that the nature of a constitutional convention is built to try and remedy the most dramatic problems that society faces, and there's no doubt this state is in that moment right now. So I think those are the 2 big questions on fixes. I do think there are real opportunities to grow some of our way out. Maybe we'll talk about this more if the economy question comes up. But I think in our district alone, there's the option to really think about how do we grow sustainable green energy jobs in this district. Just this week, there's an organization called Colorado, which is opening 80 new green-collar jobs in our district. They have a way of creating air conditioning systems that are 90% more efficient than traditional systems. They just install one in the Montbello Library. And so the ability to create tax incentives for market organizations like that in green sector economies, and in areas like ours that are the hardest hit by this recession, I think are key opportunities to try and grow our way out. Also, would love to talk more about how we expand the use of DIA as a real fiscal resource for this district. There's not yet enough I in DIA in terms of bringing real international trade through that airport. We know that Tokyo flight to Denver itself could bring $150 million a year, and so how we think about that as a resource that already lives in our district, I think is one opportunity to grow out of this as well.
Well, all the explanations about the bill has been covered. We looked at the percentages of the economic situation, about the TABOR bill, about the introvert bill, about these things that we're looking at that face Colorado. And I understand the TABOR bill is really on the table, and I understand that we are looking at spreading money and allocating it to different areas. But again, I want us to look at Colorado's economic recovery funds that have been put in place today by Governor Ritter. He just passed 4 bills as of today to be allocated in all the different areas that we need accommodations in. So again, all these issues undermining the economic stimulus that we've gotten more money than any other state in the union because of our president, Mr. Obama.